So I want to start by first very, very briefly exploring the purpose of social studies in order to give the action plan a bit of context, but also to address some of those issues in our current situation. We're looking at new objectives this year in social studies that are structured in a very different way. And if we look at our current situation, how it's been working so far, I think one of the main issues is that teachers perhaps don't recognise the importance of the subject. They recognise it's a core subject, it has to be taught for an hour a week, but they don't really understand or appreciate the importance of the subject. And I think that's something that we have to address. And I think sometimes that the learning in the subject is a bit shallow. So I think when we look at the purpose of the subject as outlined by KHDA, if we address that within our curriculum, then I think what we find is that we've got a really worthy subject that's very relevant to our children. So KHDA tell us that the purpose of this subject is to provide students with in-depth knowledge, skills and understanding in history, geography and civics, which emphasize the links between diverse groups, people, science and society. Students will contribute as responsible citizens to the building of a cohesive society that is inclusive of all while preserving the UAE culture and heritage. And I think that's a very noble cause and has noble intentions and will really help all our third culture children that form the majority of our cohort to form a greater connection with the UAE and their own heritage and allow them to have a greater sense of identity and to distinguish themselves later on in life. We know that being a third culture child brings many benefits and advantages. You can be culturally sensitive, you can be creative, you can be a risk taker, all these things that distinguish you in later life. However, many third culture children face problems with identity, feeling like they don't belong in different groups. And I think exploring UAE social studies will really help them connect to the UAE as well as their own heritage, help them understand themselves as individuals. So probably ought to get onto the action plan now. The overall aim of the action plan is to develop an innovative social studies curriculum that serves as a beacon to other subjects. Ta-da! But how? Well, let's explore. Right, so our first action target is to develop innovative long-term and medium-term plans that support and encourage a child-led and blended approach to social studies. So how are we going to go about that? Well, we're going to start by, in term one, planning teams working with the head of house team to map out the objectives throughout the year, ensuring that the sequence is cohesive and built sufficiently throughout the year. Tick, done, well done, we've done that already. Open the long-term plans up for development with key planners in each year to ensure that the objectives are ordered in a way that complements and is supported by long-term planning in other areas of the curriculum. The better we fit this in, like a jigsaw with all the other subjects, the more teachers are going to get on board and invest in the subject. And this isn't going to, the long-term plans shouldn't be a fixed document. They're a working document with a valuation column for people to make notes about how it was going, and also opportunities for them to adjust and change the sequencing in order to better complement the other areas of the curriculum. Heads of house and subject champions to work closely with planning teams to develop medium-term plans that create lots of opportunities to develop children's competencies and inquiry skills through the use of blended learning and a range of technologies. Heads of house team and subject champions to give training on the importance of the two domains, communication and presentation skills, and literacy in social studies. Communication and presentation, that kind of speaks for itself. The literacy in social studies is all about the inquiry aspect. So this lends itself to that child-led and competency-based approach. They'll be really making sure that people understand the full scope of that through training. In term two, head of house team and subject champions to monitor planning and give feedback to ensure that there are opportunities for choice, inquiry and competence development. So lots of support going into actually refining the plans and sharing the plans and improving the plans. Heads of house team in term three and subject champions to monitor planning and give feedback to ensure that there are opportunities for choice, inquiry and competence development. So now we come to our second action target, which is to embed purposeful assessment that informs teaching and learning with classroom monitor, lesson planning and mixed ability group portfolios. Before I talk about this, I want to explain there are about 40 objectives in each year for social studies, and there are 6 domains that they're shared out among. And we thought this would be quite overwhelming. So what we're trying to do, and what we've very much started doing, is creating learning goals for each of the 6 domains. So there will be 6 learning goals on which the children will be assessed, and those learning goals encapsulate all of the very, very wordy objectives that feed into them from each domain. So each domain will have a learning goal that encapsulates the component objectives. So there you go. Now, term 1, heads of house to provide each year with an assessment guide that will illustrate how each objective contributes to the learning goal on the classroom monitor. And heads of house to provide child-friendly standards for classroom monitor or learning goals. Children to have an assessment guide displayed in their portfolio for reference during discussions. And heads of house to reword the standards to ensure that they are meaningful to the relevant to children. In term 2, heads of house and subject champions to monitor how assessment is feeding into planning and teaching, and PLT to monitor how assessment is informing teaching through drop-ins, observations and learning walks. And I think that's really important that it becomes part of the development cycle, teacher development cycle, so that the school shows that it's important, and we're interested to see how that subject is developing and how teachers are developing that subject. Heads of house team to provide best practice examples of social studies portfolios through Sparks and the Sharing Good Practice Fair. Term 3, heads of house and subject champions to monitor how assessment is feeding into planning. PLT to monitor how assessment is informing teaching through drop-ins, observations and learning walks again, and heads of house team to provide more best practice examples of social studies portfolios. So then we come to our third objective target, to increase community engagement in the subject by accessing the vast wealth of expertise and experience we have within the families and communities at GEMS WSO, and the development of a flipped learning approach in Key Stage 2, FEW. There you go. I think this is very exciting because, of course, social studies isn't just about UAE issues. It's also about the many diverse cultures and communities and heritages that work together and contribute to the UAE, and how we can form those links and recognise those links and work together to form a cohesive society. So how are we going to go about doing that? Subject champions to identify occasions in the long-term planning where parents could participate in the sessions. So term 1 is quite light. In term 2, we step up a notch. Subject champions to develop effective ways and initiatives for inviting and encouraging families into the lessons. Heads of house, subject champions and teachers to share UAE social studies outcomes through the VLE and Seesaw app, so we create a real presence. Planning teams to create flipped learning projects to be completed at home with their families and shared with their peers in class. And that's a really exciting thing, that children are going home preparing these projects with their families and bringing it into the classroom, maybe even bringing their families in with them to help them with the presentation. Term 3, heads of house to capture and share successful examples of teacher and community collaboration in order to inspire and maximise its impact. So this is the very beginning of this step to increase community engagement. And by the end, what we want to do is to be able to harness lots of wonderful examples of how it's worked really well, so that next year we can blow the roof off this. Now we come to our fourth target, action target, to develop deeper learning projects in year 5 and 6 in order to create greater relevance for children and meaningful opportunities for assessment. And this is really linking it again to that applied nature of the subject, so that children understand the relevance. Now we're starting off quite light. There's nothing happening in term 1, although all of that work that we're doing on assessment from our second action target, that will contribute towards this as well. But in term 2, we start by liaising with the Key Stage 2 planning team and subject champions in order to start planning the deeper learning project to take place at the end of term 3. So it'll just be 1 in the first year. Term 3, planning team to generate rich project that provides sufficient scope for children to express their learning and provide a clear audience. Head of house team to support planning team with the planning of a deeper learning project and ensure that logistics are in place. And the head of house team and subject champions to capture the process as a vlog in order to use as guidance for next year, for the future. So this is kind of a bit of a fledgling project that we will be able to monitor and refine to apply to a greater degree next year, perhaps bring it slightly down the school next year as well. And the whole idea is that there'll be a big project that brings together all of the strands that they've been learning throughout the year, and they have to apply the knowledge that they have in order to successfully achieve the goal. There we are, that's the action plan for Social Studies 2017 and 2018. I hope it makes sense to you. Please feel free to ask any questions when I arrive.